Pak Raden, ada satu pertanyaan dari peserta, dari Pak Harun Rasid. Beliau bertanya, apa planning dari pemerintah untuk sektor ekonomi perbankan setelah pendistribusian dan pemberian vaksinasi kepada masyarakat untuk bisa meningkatkan daya beli masyarakat, dan juga bagaimana cara mengontrolnya, Pak?
Oke, terima kasih. Jadi seperti yang kami katakan tadi, kalau kita lihat kelompok masyarakat ini ada dua. Kelompok masyarakat yang berpenghasilan rendah dan kelompok masyarakat yang berpenghasilan tinggi. Ya, jadi kelompok masyarakat menengah ke bawah supaya mudah, ada kelompok masyarakat menengah atas. Kelompok masyarakat menengah ke bawah ini, pemerintah seperti yang kami sebutkan tadi akan memberikan bantuan sosial, karena memang kelompok yang rentan inilah yang pantas ya mendapatkan bantuan sosial, dan juga kelompok dari usaha menengah mikro, usaha mikro yang kami kecil dan mikro yang kami sebutkan tadi. Jadi sepanjang tahun ini pemerintah akan full memberikan bantuan kepada mereka. Sementara itu kalau kita lihat kelompok menengah atas ini sebetulnya persoalan mereka adalah bukan soal bantuan. Malah yang terjadi seperti yang kita sebutkan tadi, saving mereka, tabungan mereka di perbankan naik. Dan itu pula tabungan mereka itu juga yang dipakai untuk membeli surat hutang dan juga membeli saham di tempatnya Pak Inarno. Itu yang menyebabkan kalau kita lihat pemulihan di sektor capital market ini jauh lebih cepat. Itu seperti V, ya, seperti V itu. Tapi pemulihan di katakan sektor real dan juga dari sisi penciptaan lapangan kerja itu relatif lebih lambat. Jadi yang kami mau katakan di sini, kalau sektor menengah atas, yang paling penting adalah bagaimana memulihkan kepercayaan mereka melalui penanganan pandemi dan juga vaksinasi. Itu key-nya. Kalau kita bisa menangani pandemi dengan baik, kemudian vaksinasi bisa dilakukan, maka kelompok menengah atas yang sebelumnya kurang belanja, yang sebelumnya terlampau banyak menabung, itulah nanti yang memobilisasi kegiatan ekonomi. Mereka akan belanja, dengan belanja itu maka PDB kita akan naik. Karena seperti kita tahu, konsumsi itu berkontribusi 57-58% dari PDB. Itu yang paling utama. Jadi bagaimana supaya kelompok menengah atas ini bisa belanja lagi. Sementara kelompok bawah tadi yang kami sebutkan tadi, itu juga tetap akan dibantu. Nah, dengan demikian, kalau ada belanja barang, permintaan terhadap barang ada, maka produsen akan melakukan ekspansi jadinya. Ya, kemudian capacity utilization mereka akan naik, mereka akan meminta kredit. Ya, kredit modal kerja, kredit investasi. Jadi memang pergerakan ekonomi itu akan dimulai dari konsumsi yang harus naik. Konsumsi naik disebabkan oleh dua kelompok yang kami sebutkan tadi. Itulah yang memutar ekonomi kita, produsen akan naik, produksi akan naik, capacity utilization naik, mereka melakukan ekspansi dan investasi akan naik. Ya, itu sebetulnya yang kita lakukan. Jadi kembali hanya dua itu solusinya, dan apa yang kami sebutkan di tiga yang prioritas kebijakan intervensi utama pemerintah itu, pertama adalah penanganan pandemi dan juga vaksinasi, yang kedua kita berikan bantuan kepada kelompok yang paling rentan, dan pada saat yang sama kita mulai reformasi dan deregulasi dalam Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja. Mungkin itu yang kalau kita lihat menjawab pertanyaan yang disebutkan oleh Pak Harun tadi.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Raden Pardede atas jawabannya, dan sekali lagi atas nama panitia kami mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Pak Raden Pardede atas partisipasinya di acara BRI Group Economic Forum 2021 ini.
Mohon maaf saya duluan dulu Bu ya. Makasih semuanya. Salam sehat dan sukses
Salam
buat
sehat,
kita semua.
Baik, salam sehat juga untuk Pak Raden Pardebe. Saya akan move on ke pembicara selanjutnya, Pak Inarno Jayadi, Direktur Utama Bursa Efek Indonesia, yang akan, mohon maaf, ke pembicara selanjutnya saya persilakan kepada Pak James Walsh, to Mr. James Walsh. Kami persilakan untuk memberikan presentasinya.
Thank you very much to the moderator and to the other presenters. I have my presentation is up, or okay. Lanjutnya. I'm sorry I'm speaking in English when all of my colleagues have been able to speak in Indonesian. Maybe next year I will be better and I can do this presentation in Indonesian. But at the moment, I have to go in English. So I would start with the pandemic in Indonesia, which has become more severe in the last few months, but previously in this year, the pandemic has been less severe in Indonesia than in other countries. But in the last few months, what we've seen is an increase of cases and a decline in mobility, which has had a major impact on economic activity across the entire country. And this has been noticeable, especially in Java, where economic activity has been concentrated. Berikutnya. So what we've seen here is that because of that, GDP fell far below trend in the second and third quarters of this year. And while the IMF expects it to rise toward the end of this year and during 2021 and into 2022, there has been a loss to economic growth, and we expect growth to be a few percentage points lower than it would have been if we hadn't had the pandemic. However, we do think the economy is now recovering. So some examples of why we think that is the case is that it appears that motor vehicle sales and motorcycle sales have bottomed out and are now beginning to rise again. And that would imply that consumption is recovering, while truck and cement sales would imply that investment is now recovering. So in both cases, it seems that the economy has hit the bottom and is now beginning to grow again. So that is why we are optimistic about 2021 after a disappointing growth performance because of the pandemic in 2020. Next slide. So another issue is trade. The trade surplus has risen this year as low prices for commodities have hurt raw materials exports, and we expect that, and imports have fallen because of poor consumption and poor growth. We do expect exports to revive in 2021 as the global economy recovers, and we expect that the trade deficit, which has recently widened, will begin to close as the global economy recovers. Lanjutnya. Capital inflows are another area where Indonesia has been strongly affected. In the first quarter of this year, the outflows from Indonesia were very large, especially in bond markets, but those have subsequently become much smaller and begun to reverse. So in the last few months, overall capital flows have become positive again. And recently, we have seen both equity inflows and bond inflows return to positive territory. So that is good for the outlook for interest rates and the outlook for the stock market. And it means that investors are confident that the Indonesian economy will recover and that the pandemic itself has been handled well. Next, please. So I think this information has been covered in other slides, but just to say that the IMF's forecast for Indonesia in 2020 is that growth was probably around -2%, We expect growth in 2021, this year, of almost 5%. This will probably be led by consumption and investment. That's what we hope. This is about average for ASEAN. We expect similar growth in other Southeast Asian countries and a little slower than what we would see in China. But we do expect a strong recovery in some of the advanced economies, especially the United States and in Japan, where the 3% growth that we forecast is high compared to trend growth in the past. So next, please. One of the big uncertainties will be the pace of vaccinations. So in most advanced economies, vaccinations have now begun, but it is slower than what was expected at the beginning of the pandemic. So this is particularly true in Europe, where enough vaccine has been purchased to vaccinate the entire population of the European Union more than once, but the number of people who have been vaccinated remains very small. The pace of vaccination has been faster in the United States and especially in the United Kingdom, but it is still going to be quite a long time before everybody is vaccinated. In the United Kingdom, we think that this may happen by the end of the summer. In the United States, maybe a little after that, and in the European Union, even later. So, and there are countries such as Indonesia, India, Brazil, where this hasn't even really started. So the pace of vaccination will be slow. And that is that could be a drag on the global economy as travel is unable to recover and as restrictions have to continue. So next slide, please. Again, the fall in global trade this year around the world was comparable to what we saw in 2008, but we think it is now going to recover. And we expect Indonesia in particular to have a reasonably strong growth in recovery next year, growth in trade next year. We do expect other places to be maybe a little faster, but overall in Indonesia, we expect it to be strong. And similar with foreign direct investment, which fell very dramatically at the beginning of 2020, we do expect a big revival this year and a return to trend as in the next few years. Next. So overall, as I said before, capital flows have recovered in Indonesia and in other emerging markets. So in most places, we are now seeing inflows into emerging markets where we saw outflows about a year ago in Q1 and Q2. That's good because it shows that there's confidence in emerging market economies and in how they have weathered the crisis. Next. In Indonesia, there are some policy challenges that we are concerned about. One of them is making sure that the fiscal deficit in the medium term returns to the target that the government has laid out. So Indonesia has gained a great deal of credibility by having a 3% of GDP target for the budget deficit. It is reasonable that that was suspended in 2020, but in the long run, it needs to return back to that 3% target to make sure that that credibility is strong and that interest rates remain low. So this could be a challenge as revenue is relatively low and will need to increase, and spending needs at the same time are large and remain important. So ideally, revenue could continue to rise while spending, especially on infrastructure and social programs, continues to rise. Next. On monetary policy, the Bank Indonesia has done an excellent job of maintaining financial stability and low inflation during this crisis. They have combined a program of monetary policy loosening with some purchases of central bank bonds. So purchasing central bank bonds is a risk in any economy, but so far, inflation remains under control and the exchange rate, while it has depreciated, remains manageable. So at the moment, it seems that this policy has been very successful. One concern we would have is that central bank purchases of government bonds cannot continue forever. So as the deficit declines, the participation by the central bank in primary market bond purchases should decline. Well, we expect to see that next year, and hopefully that can be done in a context where interest rates remain low and the government's financing costs are under control, and inflation at the same time will also be under control. Next. On the financial sector, one thing we're concerned about in many countries, including Indonesia, is that as the economy has slowed, that means that banks have had credit losses and that there are non-performing loans. So in Indonesia, there has been an active program to encourage restructuring of these risks and to allow banks some flexibility in how they manage them. This is a good policy, and we see this in many countries. But what it means is that there are a lot of potential losses on banks' balance sheets that right now we are saying, or we can tolerate this for the time being. But in the long run, these will have to be addressed. So we would hope that as the economy recovers, those loans are addressed and that capital write-offs happen where they are necessary. And a concern in this area would be that credit growth has been quite low in Indonesia in the last few months and continues to decline. So as the economy begins to recover, we would need the banks to begin to lend. That has to support the recovery. So we hope that this turns around. And maybe there could be policy steps that would encourage the banks to lend more, and that would help. So next. So the main messages I would like to say are that in Indonesia, there has been a very strong response to the pandemic. And this response has supported growth this year, and it will support, it supported growth last year, and it will support growth this year. The authorities and participants in the markets should monitor both the financial sector and corporate sectors for signs of stress. So far, the banks appear quite healthy, and and the fact that there's a highly liquid situation in the banking sector means that the banks are doing okay. But if we begin to see problems in the banking sector, that means that their action should be taken. There have been structural reforms that have happened since the crisis. So the omnibus law on job creation, we think that will help growth in the medium term, but it remains to be seen how regulations will support that. And the upcoming bill on the financial sector, hopefully that will tackle regulatory challenges in the financial sector and also support financial deepening in the long run, which will support growth. Next. So thank you very much, terima kasih, and I hope this was helpful.